2000, 2025 at 4 p.m. And I'm just going to note, in the past during COVID, when we had virtual meetings only, unless anyone objects, I am going to assume that everyone affirms when we do votes, and I will ask for objections. So if you object or vote no, please state your name so that Tracy can catch that. Otherwise, it's going to be assumed that everyone will be a yes, so we just don't have 15 or 20 yeses coming through at the same time. Does anyone have any concern with that approach? I see a lot of head shaking no, and most importantly, Scott is shaking his head. He doesn't have an objection to that. So the meeting's been called to order. The first item here is the vote and approval of the agenda. As you move, and second, please state your name and city.
Move Dean O'Connor, Altoona.
Second, Joe Gatto, Des Moines.
All right. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none. All those who object to the agenda, please state your name and city. Otherwise, we will move it by unanimous approval. Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Up next is a vote and approval of the February meeting minutes.
Move Dean O'Connor, Altoona.
Second, vote Des Moines.
I'll give the second to Des Moines. Is there any discussion on the February meeting minutes? A lot of head shaking no. Again, if you object to the approval of the minutes, please state your name and city. Otherwise, it will be considered approved by unanimous consent. Hearing none, the February meeting minutes are approved. Up next, we have a consent and vote, and if we have questions, Dylan will be able to answer those. So would need a motion on this in second.
Move Dean O'Connor, Altoona.
Second, Voss, Des Moines.
Moved and seconded. Are there any questions on these items? Hearing none. Again, electronic meeting. Anyone who objects to this vote, please state your name and address. Otherwise, it will be considered approved by unanimous consent. Hearing none, consent is approved. On to public comment. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak? If so, please unmute yourself, give your name and address, and limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Doesn't appear to be any public comment. We'll move on to report and vote on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan, and Marcus is up to present that.
Thank you. Next slide, Gunnar. So we've brought this before you previously in draft form. We finalized the document with our consultant team, Tool Design. So I just wanted to walk through the final plan one last time, and then put this forward for approval, and then briefly discuss the status of the grant application. So what you're seeing here is our cover, and then the 8 chapters that correspond with the plan. These chapters align with the requirements of a comprehensive safety action plan as set forward by the previous administration who originally set this program. Each of this next slides will kind of go into some of the findings highlighted in those chapters. Next slide, Gunnar. This is, if you go to our project website for the overall project, you can find these documents, the overall plan, and then the appendix items. This will transition over to the MPO's website in the near future to be housed until the end of essentially the project, and then moving forward. Next slide. So in chapter 2, we outlined the Vision Zero commitment, which the MPO adopted in January of 2025, stating that 0 deaths and serious injuries is the target, and it's by 2020 or 2045. Next slide. Chapter 3 and in Appendix A goes into details about the key safety findings These haven't really changed except for the third bullet point about rural crashes. There's some clarification in that text that was changed between the exec meeting and today, so that it just made a little bit clearer. It was made clearer what was meant by that there are more fatal and serious injury crashes occurring at a higher percentage in rural areas. So next slide, please. This again shows the high injury network overlaid with the high risk network. So that high injury network looks back at previous crashes that have occurred, while the high risk network looks into the future and potential roadway characteristics that are associated with higher crash rates. So those blue lines that you see are areas that don't necessarily have a high number of fatal and serious injury crashes, but the roadway characteristics fit trends for crashes that involve fatal and serious injuries. Chapter 4 and Appendix B goes into the community engagement, which we've talked about previously, the key findings related to surveys and engagement efforts. And then again, we have a photo here of our most recent open house that dug into some of the countermeasures and help us support decisions as we move forward into the grant application. Next slide. Chapter 5 and Appendix F looks at project prioritization. So this is where we start getting into kind of the meat of what can the communities do in terms of projects to improve safety. And on the right there, you see, the percentage weight given to each of these characteristics in terms of supporting and identifying the project priorities. It includes the high injury network, that high risk network, proximity to schools, parks, and transit stops. A small amount of weight goes to our degrees of disadvantage areas, and then a similar amount of weight goes to capital improvement program projects, so things that are already programmed and planned for improvements, just showing that there is effort being made toward safety improvements already. When we dig into Appendix F, and probably most useful for the communities, we get a list of projects and a corresponding map, which shows where those critical and medium priority safety projects are. And then if you go to the next slide, Gunnar, in that table, it identifies countermeasure categories, and this was a change from the draft version where we had previously had a number of countermeasures listed there and kind of more prescriptive definitions of what can be done on these streets. By changing it to these more broad categories, it leaves the opportunity for community staff to make decisions about what are the best countermeasures for that corridor and that project in particular. Next slide. Chapter 7 goes into MPO policy and process changes. These are recommendations that the MPO can take to improve safety and help guide safety improvements in the region. Things like adjusting scoring criteria for STBG projects and other programs. And then the key one here is making recommendations to update SUDAS or having a separate design guidelines that can be included for communities to include more countermeasures that we're recommending in the plan. Chapter 8 goes into progress and transparency. So how do we take the plan and move it into implementation, and how are we going to show that we're making an effort towards safety, our safety goals? The main thing we're planning to do is to add the goals to our online dashboard that we already have for safety, including this graph to the right that shows the trend and how we get to 0 by 2045. And then additionally, we're going to add maps to the dashboard for those high injury and high risk networks and show the project priority maps and then be able to track kind of where communities are making projects or doing projects that fit with those priorities. Next slide, please. So next steps, today we're here to consider approval of the plan. So we'll take that action after a brief update on the NOFO. We're working toward the grant application process now. We've sent brief surveys to the Technical Transportation Committee members for each community, just to get feedback on what are priority projects, what would communities like to do in terms of countermeasures, is funding available for matches, those types of questions. And then we are still expecting the NOFO to be released before the end of March, which again, today is the 27th, so it's a limited timeline. But the guidance that we've received recently says that USDOT is on track to hit that, and that it would be about a 90-day window. So we'd have until about June to complete the grant application and get it submitted. So with that, staff is recommending approval. I'm happy to take any questions on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan.
Move to approve Altoona, Dean O'Connor.
Second, Voss, Des Moines.
All right, moved and seconded. Are there any questions for Marcus? Hearing none, again, because we're in an electronic meeting format, consider everyone, if you object to this, please state your name and city. Otherwise, it'll be considered approved by unanimous consent. Hearing no objections, it is approved. We'll move on to item 7, the report and vote on the draft fiscal year 2026 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget. Over to Dylan.
Thank you. We went through the budget and a little bit of the work program last time. We just wanted to provide an update and give you a chance to weigh in before we send this on to the USDOT or the Iowa DOT and Federal Highway Administration for their review. Just a reminder, we have to get this in by the end of the month for the draft, and then we'll come back in May for you to approve the final budget and work program that has to be due in June. If you go to the next slide, the one thing that is different this year, one of the main things that's different this year is now that we have this strategic planning framework, which we discussed last month, I believe, we have tried to incorporate this into the work program. So all of the tasks that we're doing in the work program now adhere to one of these 4 pillars to try to just make that a little more concise and streamlined. So I won't go through this because we've gone through this. This has been approved, but I just wanted to point that out that this might look a little bit different. So if you go to the next slide, for the actual work items, so for each one of those pillars, we've got various projects identified, and you can see there what the project is, who's in the lead. Typically, it's the MPOs. The MPO is in the lead role, although sometimes we're in more of a support role. And then we've got a note of whether these are federal requirements or if they're just kind of ongoing continuations or if they're new. The governance and operations, these are our standard things like getting the, running the office, getting the budget done, administering these committee meetings and so forth, ensuring we have good financial accounting and so forth. That's what goes in that governance and operations category. If we go to the next one, this is really where a lot of the meat and potatoes are for the MPO. These are the regional planning and federal requirements. So you can see a lot of these tasks are federally required. This is things like administering our funding allocations, our TIP, the long-range transportation plan, and so forth. So those are pretty status quo standard things that we do. If you go on to the next one, these are things that are not necessarily federally required, but these are services that we provide to our members. So providing data, providing modeling assistance, grant assistance, as well as some of the media relations and so forth that help bolster the work that we do here. And then finally, the last one, this is a newer category from the strategic planning framework that we're calling purpose-driven innovation. So these are kind of those big projects, such as the Future 435, potentially looking at passenger rail, the economic impact study we put in there, emerging technology, so looking at autonomous vehicles as those start to approach our region. That's what goes in this category. So these are some of the newer things, I would say. If we look at the budget, this has largely remained the same from last time, especially on the anticipated expenditures. There's really no change there. On the anticipated revenue, the USDOT funds that the target that we received from the USDOT was about $250,000, $260,000 more than we anticipated. So what we were able to do with that, in the previous version we showed you, we were taking some funds from MPO reserves. We no longer have to do that. So this has no reserve funds coming out of it. It's all using funds that we are collecting this year, if you will, from either USDOT or assessments. There's surplus at the end of the year is a little bit smaller, but again, we're not borrowing from reserve funds. And then if you go to the final slide, we showed you this last time and it's been updated just a little bit. This shows our revenue and cost forecast, and you can also see what our reserve balance will likely do. Obviously, there's a lot of assumptions that go into this as far as what costs and expenses and revenue is going to look like in the future. But knowing what we know now and being a little conservative with it, you can see that our costs do start to outpace our revenues going forward, but we do have a very healthy reserve that we will dip into. And even over the next 10 years or so, we will still have adequate reserve to, make sure that we're in a good position. Something that we'll keep an eye on and we'll keep working with our finance subcommittee on as time goes on. But right now we look to be in a pretty good position. I went through that quickly, and this again is just a draft, but if there are questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, we'd ask for your approval.
Move to approve Dean O'Connor, Altoona.
Second, Len Murray, Pleasant Hill.
All right, been moved and seconded. Are there any questions on that?
Good work, Dylan. Nice job.
Right. I
You
do
and your
like not
team.
taking money out. Yeah, I like not taking money out of the reserves. So that's awesome.
Yeah, very nice.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Doesn't appear to be any other questions. Because this is an electronic meeting, we'll ask for the objections. Please state your name and address if you object to approving this. Otherwise, it'll be considered approved by unanimous consent. Hearing no objections, it is approved. Our next item is other non-action items of interest to the committee. Dylan or anyone, did you have anything?
We do not have anything. Next month, we will have a pretty busy agenda, so just be prepared. One thing we'll have on the agenda for you is the funding subcommittee recommendations that were made earlier this week, so stay tuned for that.
Did anyone else have anything to bring up? All right, our next meeting is 4 p.m. on April 17th, 2025. Seeing no other business before us, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.